Let's take a look at the structure of our HTML document. When we look at the structure of our HTML document, the first thing that we notice is this doctype declaration at the top. This tells the browser what language it can expect in the rest of the document. In this case, the language is HTML, which is defined by the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, and it's based on the document type definition HTML 4.01. The address, the web address or URL where that document type definition can be found is right there in the doctype declaration. There are three different types of doctypes for the HTML 4.01 language. There's the strict definition, which is the one that we're looking at here. There's the transitional declaration, which we're looking at here. And finally, there's the frame set declaration. Let's take a look at the difference between the three. The strict definition of the language is the HTML that they wish we had. It's HTML without a lot of the features that have been tacked on and added to the language over the years to handle things like different fonts. Instead, it uses something called style sheets, as you can see here. And we'll get into style sheets later on in our lesson. This is the strict definition, and it's not the one we're going to use for most of our course. The one we're going to use for most of our course is the transitional definition. The reason for this is that modern browsers, the browsers that are available today, do not support all of the features of style sheets that would be necessary for us to be able to make full use of the strict definition. The transitional definition is fine. It's still conformant with the standard, but it's what the World Wide Web Consortium calls best current practice. This is a set of language elements that are best understood by the majority of the browsers that are out there. If you conform to the transitional definition of a language, chances are your documents can be read by a broad array of different browsers, a wide market of users throughout the internet and throughout the world. Finally, there's the frame set definition. The frame set definition is only used for frames documents. In fact, it's only used for the document that defines the frames within which there will be transitional or strict, probably transitional documents in each of the frames. The frame set DTD only contains the language which defines the frames. And we'll get into frames again in a later chapter of our lesson. Let's take a look at each of these documents in our browsers. And I have on this computer here three different browsers. I have Internet Explorer, and here it is. This is Internet Explorer version 5.1, which is the latest version available for this Macintosh operating system that I'm using here today. And there's our strict document, and there's our transitional document. They're almost exactly identical. They wrap a little bit differently, but the margins look the same and the font size looks the same. They're effectively identical. Now let's look at these two documents in Netscape Communicator version 4.77. Again, this is the latest version that's available for this computer. There is also a version of Netscape called Netscape 6, which is really alpha level code. It's not what I would call production code. But we'll look at what that's based on, which is Mozilla, in a moment. In any event, this is Netscape 4.77. You'll notice that the table is not centered in the strict version, and it is in the transitional version. You'll also notice that the font sizes are a little bit different. That has to do with the way that style sheets are defined. And style sheets are not a very accurate way yet of defining the size of a font. In fact, you can even specify the font size in absolute pixels, and it'll still come out different on different browsers. This is one of the reasons that I don't recommend that you use these advanced features for your documents that are going out into broad circulation. If you have control and you're in an intranet and inside a corporation, you have control over the browsers that your users are using, then go ahead and use the features that work on that browser. And if style sheets work well on that browser, or if they work well enough for your application, go ahead and use them. But if you're putting your documents out on the World Wide Web, where people are going to be using a variety of different browsers, some of which you've never even seen, some of which may be several years old, you don't want to use features that are going to break that presentation for those browsers. So I recommend you go ahead and use the transitional, which in this case, as you can see, works, instead of the strict, which in this case you can see does not work. Finally, let's take a look at Mozilla. Mozilla is pretty much the latest browser out there. It's the code under which the new Netscape browser, Netscape 6, will be based, and there's versions of Netscape 6 out there right now, but they're based on older alpha versions of Mozilla. And it conforms to the standards rather exactly. Notice here's the strict, and there's the transitional. Very, very little difference. A little imperceptible difference, or almost imperceptible, I can perceive it, in the size of the box of the table, but that's about it. This is a fully conformant browser, and I recommend that you get a copy and that you use it in designing your documents. Just don't count on everybody else's browsers to work that way. Have some other browsers on your computer, a copy of Internet Explorer, a copy of Netscape, maybe even some older browsers that you can test your code on so that you know how well it works out there in production. So that is our explanation of the doc type declaration. Again, here's the strict, here's the transitional, and here's the frame set. We're going to be using the transitional version. And in our next lesson, we'll look at some of the other elements in the top part of this document.